Hi, everyone. As you can see, I'm on the Death Star today because I guess because I'm giving you an exam, I've gone over to the dark side. Sorry about that. Anyway, hope you're doing well. We've got a lot of stuff to get through today, so I'm gonna start right off and quickly talk about your exam, which we have completed, and you're gonna recognize a lot of questions on it. Okay, hold on just a second. Let me put this up. Yep. Oh, can someone do the transcript thing? I can't do that unless someone posts it. There you go. Thank you, Haley. Okay. Okay, nothing new here. Hopefully you had oops, shoot, sorry. There we go, nice and big. All right, so we have completed the test, and it is 52 questions if you want to keep score. And you'll, as I said, recognize probably 19 or 20 of them, which should help you a lot. You can take it any time between midnight tonight and midnight Sunday. And it will be set for an 80-minute period. And that should be more than enough time. By the way, we use that based on the time of the class. If we had taken the exam in class, that's what you would have gotten. So the test is designed to be that, but you should have more than enough time. It is open book, but again, it's really critical you study before you get there. You're not going to be able to look up all the answers or even all the answers of the questions that you haven't gotten. So it's important, very important you study. And it must be taken alone. That's very important as well. But you can use video, you can use your notes, the slides, all that stuff. But I urge you to study beforehand. And I'm not going to go through the whole study strategy thing again. What I do recommend, if you have any questions, is that you look at last class's slide. I guess that would last class's video. That would be Tuesday. And take a look at what I recommend there in terms of studying with a friend, teaching, all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to go through it again. I have too much to talk about. Covers everything through today. And I think I will, even if I end a little early today, I'll just end class, but I got a lot to cover. So I'm going to have to go a little quickly to get everything in. So everything covered on today's test, I'm sorry, in today's class will be on this test. What you learned yesterday during discussion section will not be on the test. That will be on the next test. So the discussion section material you'll be responsible for on this first test is everything since, including last Wednesdays, so the 20th of October. Yesterday's section went through color, and you'll be tested on that material on your next test. Okay, let me take a quick break here, see if there's any questions, and then we'll do our lecture. Okay, there's a chat question. Yeah, Phoebe asked, will you be able to see your score right away? Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. Yeah, that's fine. But you won't know your letter grade right away. And just so you're going to be able to anticipate this, I'm going to give you a very rough letter grade range to give you some sense of how you did in terms of what a letter grade would be assigned. But I'm not assigning a letter grade to this exam. We wait and add up all your points across all 3 exams and see how everyone else in the class did, and then assign a letter grade then. Okay, so yeah, you can get your number, I guess, right away as soon as you submit the test. I guess that works like that. It defaults like that, so that's fine. But don't freak out until you see what the letter grade is, and even then, it's just just there to give you an idea of how you did. We're not assigning letters now. Okay. Other questions on the exam or the grading or anything like that? Are you talking about a curve at the end? Yeah, we kind of do curve it at the end. Although I have to say, because everyone's been doing so well on exams, at least in my classes during quarantine, during this remote process, that it is going to probably be not much of a curve at all. People do very, very well. So you'll see. that we do take into account if there's any major problems, but for the most part, there ain't much of a curve. There isn't a lot of added points or anything like that. Okay. Any other questions? All right, cool. Yeah, so just so you know, because of the the way that I'm giving free questions out, and you have it's open book and all that stuff, and you're doing it in the comfort of your own home, people do substantially better on these sorts of tests during the remote learning. So, make sure you're studying hard so you can keep up with the rest of the class. All right, if there's no other questions, we'll continue with our lecture. Oh, look, there's little people down here pretending to type. Look at that. I never noticed that before. It's interesting because it doesn't really look like they're touching anything. It looks kind of weird. All right, well, it is the Death Star, so things here can be strange. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue with our all right. So we were talking about the ecological approach. And to remind you, this is a very different approach to perception, a very different theory of perception. And in some ways, it is completely different from every other theory we've learned, because it makes the assumption that if you rethink what the stimulus is to the sense organs, to the eyes, to the ears, that you might be able to find out that it actually is a very rich and not impoverished sort of input. So what Gibson is doing is rejecting the notion that the stimulus is impoverished, is distorted, and is considering, once you put the animal in its normal context and give them test a function that is absolutely relevant to them, that you do see that perception might not need all this enhancement that the Gestaltist approach and the connectionist approach, computational approach, all suggested was needed. And that is very, very radical. It's rejecting the notion that the proximal stimulus is poor. Okay. And as I said, we discussed that in the context of how we can ecologize, right? We use this term, ecologize the problem of perception, which involves putting the animal in its normal context and thinking about what the animal normally encounters, not things floating off in the distance with no context, no texture under it. Remember the arrow thing? That's something you can maybe set up in the laboratory, but to actually start a theory of perception based on that scenario, Gibson would say, that's ridiculous. That's not how the brain, it's not how the visual system, the eye, evolved. It evolved to, in a context where there was rich information in the environment. And so it's the job of the ecological psychologist to determine what that rich information to the senses might be. And to exemplify that, we talked about the idea of how to get from a two-dimensional stimulus to a three-dimensional perceptual experience. And what Gibson said is, well, you're the kind of classic interpretation of the stimulus as two dimensions is incorrect. It's not really full enough, because, yes, it is a screen, I guess, in a way, but it's not like it's taking pictures of the world. There's a flow, a constant flow across those screens. So time, essentially, is another dimension that allows the third dimension to be perceived. And there are all these examples of being able to perceive, structure of things from seeing motion and only motion. So there's no structure in that image until you see it, or with people, which we're going to be, oopsie, sorry, it's not working right now. But there's lots and lots of information that can be recovered in just motion, providing all this information for structure. So this is a critical kind of move for him. It's his first move to show that the stimulus can be rich. It can be something that's not impoverished in this way when you consider what animals are usually doing. They're moving, their eyes are moving if their heads aren't moving, all this sort of stuff, and what they're encountering, especially other things that move. And that's how one could go about kind of ecologizing the problem of perceiving depth, perceiving things as solid, that sort of thing. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more. The idea that the way to think about the eye and the stimulus on the eye is through kind of things flowing across it, right? And in fact, think about yourself walking down a hallway, or maybe just walking outside. What happens to the stimulus on your eyes as you do so? You just move your head back and forth right now and see that. It's as if all this texture that you're in, and me, the Death Star, but wherever you are, when you move your head forward, when you walk forward, there's this kind of general flow, a global flow of all this texture that is going to be flowing across your eyes. Gibson gives this a name, and it's a nice name since I just used the term, global flow. It's just what happens with the stimulus when a perceiver moves. If you're moving back, if you're moving to the side, there's going to be a flow of all this texture that's kind of reflected off of the world onto your eyes. That's going to all be flowing across your eyes. I think it's most intuitive if we just talk about moving forward right now, but it absolutely pertains to whenever we move, and that's most all the time. When you move forward, there's a flow of texture that kind of emanates from the position you're moving towards. So, okay, right now I'm moving towards my finger, and if I kind of were to describe what this kind of texture would be on my retina, on my eye, there'd be a flow all around the finger, kind of starting from where where I'm headed at my fingertip right there. So when we move, we induce a global flow, and we know that this is something that is perceptually important to us, right? We'll talk about this example in just a second, but here's hopefully you can see that. Oh, shoot, did I set up the, can you guys see that okay? Let me just make sure this is, I got a couple of videos today, so let me just quickly stop my sharing and then come back to it and make sure that, oh, you saw it good? Thank you. Oh, everyone saw it good, but let me just make sure everything's clicked. Yeah, so I'm optimizing it now for video. So you'll see it even better now, supposedly. Okay, here we go again. And you've seen sort of these things before. We'll talk about them again, and we'll start again. But they're very effective. I mean, even this stinky little video that I was able to get online showing this roller coaster from the perspective of a rider, mostly, you might get a sense of motion, right? I mean, my kids and I used to love this roller coaster app that was on the iPhone, where you could design a roller coaster and then look at the phone and imagine yourself riding on it from the spectator's perspective, the car's perspective. And even though you're looking at this stinky little mini image, you got a sense of your own motion. You got a sense that you were moving forward, and motion simulator rides do this sort of thing, of course. And it's effective because what happens here is these simulations, these videos, the roller coaster app, other things from Universal Studios, Simpsons ride, that sort of thing. They are able to kind of simulate this global flow, right? They're able to simulate what the visual outcome is of a perceiver moving forward. And in so doing, it becomes a very effective way to simulate motion. So whenever okay, so there's the idea of an emanation point, and I don't care too much about this, but that you understand this, but what this is trying to show is that as you're moving forward on a bridge, say you're in a car and you're moving forward on a bridge, the point towards where you're moving is kind of where the flow emanates from. I'm just trying to give a kind of description of how you could characterize this flow. If I'm moving towards my hand, the point you're moving towards kind of all the texture kind of flows out from there. That's less important than the idea that everything moves, all the texture moves when you're moving forward. So whenever you move forward, backwards, side to side, you induce a global flow. There's a flow of texture across our eye. Okay. Again, think about moving forward is probably the most intuitive way, but it's true no matter how you're moving. such that if you see global flow, when you detect global flow, you have reliable information that you're moving. That point, reliable information, is going to prove to be really important. Because again, what Gibson wants to show here is that with a appropriate understanding, the stimulus for vision, the stimulus on our eye, can be shown to be very rich and very, very informative. So he wants to find situations where, yeah, the brain, the perceiver, can in fact rely on this information while we're interacting with the world. So whenever you move forward, you get this global flow. And that's really the only time in the real world, at least, that it's ever generated, so that when the brain can detect global flow, it knows one thing and one thing only, that you're moving forward, right? In the real world, at least. Right? We've already talked about synthesized versions of it, but in the real world, that's something you know. And we know it's effective because of these synthetic examples, these laboratory examples. You can basically synthesize global flow and show that the brain and body reacts as if it's moving, even though it's not. So let's talk about these. And some of the original examples done years and years ago involve this was before, good computer animation, to synthesize, to kind of simulate global flow. What they did is they built a moving room. And I actually had one of these years ago, probably 25 years ago, in the basement of the psychology building. We built a room that was on wheels, was on bicycle wheels, and it was a big room. It's like that size of a big room, the size of a walk-in closet, maybe a little bigger than that. And we put it on wheels, and we could get people to stand inside of it and move the room around them as they stood still, right? And see what happened, see what their experience was, if they at all changed their posture. And in fact, you find they do. And we're not the people that discovered this. We set it up for other reasons, but we did some follow-up research on this. But back when it was originally discovered, they'd have subjects go in the room, stand on, basically it's called a force plate, but it's really kind of like God, do they still have these things? The Wii mat, where it can measure your center of gravity. You can measure your postural changes. It's a video game thing. I don't know, but it's very easy to do these days. But ask people to stand as still as possible, and then not tell them what's going on. And then as they're standing there, kind of just looking forward, this room around them that has kind of textured wallpaper, it kind of starts moving back and forth, and people immediately feel as if they're moving. So you'll see people look down at their legs to see if maybe they tripped or something. And once they see it's steady, they'll try to steady themselves. But even if they really work hard at steadying themselves, their body will start swinging back and forth, very consistent with the movement of the room. Okay. And again, that can be measured with, how their center of gravity is changing and how it's detected by this device. And it's very consistent despite what people might try to do. Now, what this is showing here, I had a friend who actually did this for his dissertation years ago. This is showing a toddler in the moving room. My friend tested toddlers in moving rooms. And what you find with toddlers, because, their coordination isn't great yet, they're not standing, they have trouble standing still for any period of time, that if you put them in a moving room and move the room back and forth, they'll start swaying back and forth and plop, fall on their face. Okay, don't worry, no toddlers were hurt in the making of this experiment. What he did is he had big foam mattresses everywhere around the toddler. And in fact, the toddlers loved it. I got to see him running some of his subjects. It was absolutely adorable. You put them in the room, they're kind of standing there, not sure what's going on. The room kind of slowly moves back and forth. They go, oh, and topple over. And then they jump up and say, more, 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 more. They love it. And you can, measure what happens with a toddler's coordination and all that sort of thing. But even without being a toddler, and even knowing something about the experiment, I went in it too, and my posture changed as well. And by the way, I should say it's, when the room moves this way, I would move back a little bit, kind of compensating for what I would feel as my forward motion. but it's, you could say, well, maybe it's just I'm trying to avoid a wall coming towards me, but that's not the case, because it works backwards too. If the room's moving away from me, I will move forward as if I'm compensating for my backward motion. And this is a very, very consistent sort of effect. I'm seeing lots of chats now. Let me just very quickly make sure that everything's okay. Oh, everyone, okay. People are all asking questions. Wonderful, wonderful. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't a problem with our connection or anything. Okay. Anyway, you know something about this. Because of these wonderful rides that they have at Universal Studios. I guess the Simpsons ride is still there. One of my sons went to Halloween Horror Nights at Universal, and they had a little extra time and went to the Simpsons ride. And I love the Simpsons ride. I think it's really fun. But you know how it works, right? You sit in this little car, and then it's a roller coaster essentially. Star Tours works the same principle, but the car does move a little bit. It moves up and down, side to side. I actually interviewed some folks that design these rides, and the car moves about 3 feet in every direction. It can also tilt and stuff like that, but it is not going forward to a roller coaster or anything like that. You experience that because of the visible global flow that these things take advantage of. These things take advantage of the fact that your brain interprets, global flow of forward motion as if you're moving, and that's how the simulation is effective. That your brain has evolved to detect global flow and therefore have information about the fact that you're moving forward. In most of the case of the Simpsons ride, I guess you do move backwards a little bit too, but you have tons of familiarity with these sort of motion simulator rides now. You know how effective they can be. Okay, so let's just very quickly sum this up by talking about the implications of the, I guess, trustworthiness, the reliability of this information. So this is kind of a little bit of a further discussion, but it's just going to make this point very strong for us. That whenever you move forward, just as an example, it works for all type of motion, perceived motion, but when you move forward, you are generating global flow. Okay, there's a lawful relationship. It always is going to happen, whether or not you notice it or not. Chances are your brain is on some level. When you're moving forward, there is a flow of all the world's texture, your current world's texture, across your eyes. And that's a lawful thing. It's like gravity. Whenever we move, there's going to be a global flow. It's something the brain evolved with. Such that when your brain detects global flow, it can tell us that we're moving. So this link between what happens to visual stimulation based on a very specific example of something happening in the world, my movement in the world, is telling the brain, yep, there's global flow. Perceiver knows it's moving. It is a trustworthy type of information. It is completely different from the notion that the stimulus is not trustworthy. It's degraded. We talked about how it's inverted and all this sort of stuff. Gibson's rethinking what the stimulus is and say, we're not talking about pictures. We're not talking about, little baby images and all that sort of stuff. We're talking about flows across the eye. And when you talk about flows, put the animal into natural context, so there can be a global flow of all this texture, you're ending up with trustworthy information, what he calls specificational information. Don't worry, it's just reliable information that's completely unlike how other theories kind of portrayed the information to the receptor organs. The specificational information is a type of information, in this case visual, that the brain can rely on and doesn't really need to interpret. It just needs to really detect it, right? It doesn't need to process it and kind of make calculations and kind of do a whole bunch of enhancement. All those enhancements were required because of the way the stimulus was portrayed as being really poor. Gibson's saying, nah, the stimulus is not poor. You just need to find it as a scientist. You need to find the stimulus that can be trustworthy, that can be reliable, that is specifying what's in the world. And that's specificational information. Cool. Okay, let's take our little break here. We'll do a question and I'll see what all the comments are about. Let's see here. Good. Yes. Is this, Sarah asks, is this part of the reason dogs need to see out the window and driving cars? Wow. Sarah, that's a really interesting question for us dog lovers and perception lovers. Is this part of the reason dogs need to see out the window in a driving car to be less anxious? That's a great question, Sarah. I've never thought about that. I will ask my little doggy when I get home. I will ask Max when I get home. Thank you. Thank you for asking that. That's it. The Wii Fit. That's what it was. The Wii Fit balance board. Hoverboards. Okay, sure. Yeah. I guess they kind of exist, right? Reminds me of that one ride at the amusement park Gravitron where it spins really fast and you're forced. Yep. Yeah, there's an element of a global flow there too. Yanelli says this is why VR is scary. Yeah, it can be. Also, there are instances where if VR is not, this is interesting and relevant, if the visual component of the VR is not synchronized to your movements as you're kind of moving your head and looking around, if there's a little delay, it can make you quite nauseous because the global flow is there, but it's not the same global flow that is not exactly synced to your movement, which is also, by the way, so both my sons actually went to Halloween Horror Nights. One went to the Simpsons ride. The other one had a chance to go to the Harry Potter ride, which I've been on as well. And it made him nauseous, and it made me nauseous too when I was on it. And this is the one where you're kind of going to the side, and it is kind of a motion simulator ride, but most of the motion is this way. You're kind of going through the ride. You're actually moving through the ride this way. And man, did I get nauseous. Don't drink a whole lot of butterbeer before you go on that Harry Potter ride if you haven't done it. I think there are sync problems there too. Specificational information, sure. I don't see who asked that. Sorry about that. But yes, this is just the type of information that the brain would consider trustworthy, that is not the type of, degraded or impoverished stimulus that other theories have been considering is the stimulus for vision. Gibson's looking for the type of information that gets to the eye or gets to the ear that is going to tell you something about the world reliably, okay? And it might not look like it's not going to be a picture of the world. It's going to be a very different type of information. Here we're talking about a flow across the eye. But if the flow is always occurring in the same way, based on, a perceiver's movement, then even if it doesn't, even if it kind of is more abstract, it's still something the brain can rely on and doesn't therefore need to enhance. Doesn't need to make calculations. Yeah, look at that. Thank you. I guess somebody maybe copied the transcript. Good. Thank you very much. Okay, let's do our question. Should be very easy. This is a question about how Gibson redescribes the stimulus, when it comes to something that might be sufficient for perception. In what ways did Gibson, the ecological approach, redescribe visual information to show how it could be sufficient for perception? And we've talked about different ways he could do that. A, incorporating perceiver movement. B, incorporating object movement. C, recognizing the importance of texture gradients. Or D, all of the above. Should be easy. And you're all doing great. Give you another 10 seconds or so. Sorry, I'm looking at these people typing. So funny. Okay, that's good. Most of you got this correct. The correct answer is D. So if you look back on your slides, yes, the perceiver movement's absolutely critical. We just talked about global flow, but we also talked about this motion parallax idea, that being able to perceive the relative distance of things is kind of facilitated by the fact that as we move forward, the kind of flow of closer things to our eyes is faster than the flow that's behind it. Remember, we talked about that. You can go back and listen to the lecture from last class if you need that. Incorporating object movement, we talked about that at the very beginning and the end of last class, where the movement of things alone can provide information for structure. So not our examples of structure for motion, especially when you'll see as we're talking about perception of other people and other animals, things that move a lot in very characteristic ways. So that's also true. And then C, recognizing the importance of texture gradients, right? So we never perceive things just in isolation. We're always perceiving things relative to other things. And one of the most important things that we see things relative to are ground planes, or textures on large surfaces, and that can provide very reliable specificational information for things like relative distance and relative size. So the correct answer is D, all the above, and most of you got that. Great. So I did see there are a couple of questions that popped up in the meantime. Is that a rat running in the green screen? You know, I think it's supposed to be a little baby robot. There it is. I think it moves kind of like a rat. I don't know. It's the Death Star. Maybe they don't do a good job with their hygiene. Who knows? But I think it's a robot. Will the other questions on the exam be similar to one? Yeah, absolutely. Most of the questions are conceptual, Satali, and so I've been asking a lot of conceptual questions, especially the last few weeks for your practice questions, and that's exactly the type of question you'll be getting. So I think by the end of the day, I'll give you 19 or 20 questions. The other 32 are very similar. Okay. Oh, Justin says it's a mouse droid. Oh, that's why it looks like a rat. Very cool. Thank you. Justin must be a Star Wars fan. Cool. Okay, let's go back to our lecture. So we're going to shift gears a little bit here, but you're going to see some common themes throughout. And we're going to find other ways that we're going to characterize information that can be reliable. And one of the things I said when I was discussing this just now was that the information is going to be very different from thinking of a kind of degraded image, like a degraded photograph or something like that on the eye. This notion that the eye just take snapshots and then start from there with its perceptual analysis. It kind of worked for structuralism and some of the other theories, but for Gibson, for the ecological theory, it is absolutely wrong to think of the stimulus like that. It's not like a snapshot at all. It's more like a flow. Without getting you too confused, this is sometimes how I explain it to people. How the skin, right? We can perceive things with the skin. Here's my phone. Here we go. You guys are all familiar. You see this? No, it's invisible. Okay, let me find something that's less invisible. Let's see. Is that soda can? That's awesome. All right. No, everything's invisible. I have no idea. My keys. All right, that should work, right? Yeah, there it kind of works. Okay, so I can, if it was dark at night and I couldn't see anything, I could tell these were my keys, and I'd be able to tell if I kind of tell. Maybe this would be hard. Say you wanted to play a trick at me. You say, okay, Rosenblum, what is this that your hand is touching? And you kind of let my hand, feel things. And I might after a while get it that it's the keys, but nowhere as quickly as if I took the key and started, kind of gliding, or you did this, you kind of glided the keys across my skin. And so what's happening there when I'm touching something with my hands is there's a kind of a flow of this kind of pressure, flow of texture on my skin of the object. And that's how, skin perceives things. That's how we touch things. There's a flow across our skin. That's how to think of the eyes, right? So it's not like the hand can take photographs. And in fact, if you just put the keys in there like this, I wouldn't be good at it. But there's a flow of the texture of the keys across my hand, and that's how I'm able to perceive it. There's kind of a pattern over time, and that's how to think of the eyes. That's how to think of the eyes. It's a very different kind of interpretation of what the important stimulus is, which brings us kind of back to an old concept. Remember this, the simulative assumption? Remember this, the simulative assumption? The idea was this, that there was I can pretend this is the simulator. So they say there's a real tree up over here. This would be, or maybe we can say the real tree is here. And there would be, if you were kind of to take a cross section of the light, there'd be a little simulation of the tree here. It would be two-dimensional, I guess. It would be smaller because of the distance of the tree, all that sort of thing. But there's a simulation of the tree there. And that's critical for the older theories of perception, right? Because that simulation then gets projected, remember the projective assumption, gets projected to the back of the eye, and it gets even more distorted according to these old theories. But that's what you start with, and somehow, through picking out little features, or organizing the features, or the features through connections, all that sort of stuff, we're going to go through some very elaborate processes to get back to perception. And again, that's assumed by most theories. And the question is, does it work? Is all of our perception based on perceiving some type of simulation in the light? And just so you can kind of anticipate where we're going to go, Gibson's going to say absolutely not. He's going to completely reject this. But let's talk about a very specific example that I think you'll find compelling. So does this work? In other words, does this notion, is this going to really be kind of like the starting point of perception, that there's a simulation of things in the world in the light that then gets to the eye and needs to be reinterpreted? And Gibson says this: let's think about an example of where you're coming upon a brink. Okay, and what brink, all that means is, like, if you're walking through the psychology building where I am right now, and you come upon a stairway down, that's going to go down to the first floor. You're coming to a brink, you're coming to stairs, and all the brink is that, there's a kind of a step off, that sort of thing. So here, there's a kitty cat looking at a brink. Sometimes brinks can be high, right? Sometimes they can be low, like steps. Sometimes they can be high. There are parts of the campus that have large brinks. So if you go to the commons and you don't take the stairs, you'll see that there's kind of really big step off places. There's kind of the outside of the arts building has like these huge brinks, but most of the brinks, hopefully, that we're dealing with are traversable by stairs or something like that. So yeah, there's another example of it. So this is the brink example, and there I am. Okay, you can see I'm bald, walking up to a brink. And the question is, how do I know what type of brink this is? Whether this is a brink I can step down, like the stairs in this building, or whether maybe I have to, kind of hop down, like the ones that are by the commons. You know what I'm talking about, like the big concrete blocks that you have to kind of jump down to the next level on. Or is it a brink that maybe is the side of a cliff, or a mountain edge or something like that, where I'd have to get a ladder or rappelling equipment or something like that, and then get down from there? How do I know about the height of that brink as I come upon it? Okay, that's the question. How do I know that surface, H? So so actually I put these up at the same time, but this is just kind of, I'm just labeling the lowest surface here. What I need to do as a perceiver is to determine the height of H. And here's the problem. As I come to that brink, right, there is no light reflecting off of this surface and getting to my eye, right? Because it's, we used to say that this is a kind of hidden surface because, I'm not, there's nothing I can sense that's reflecting off of this edge. But still I can do it, right? And you can come up with many, many theories on how I can do this, how I can determine whether I need to step or leap or repel or whatever. How am I able to do this? Is there another type of information that's going to tell me something about the height of this edge here, the height of H? And here's what Gibson says, okay? what you need to do is, again, rethink what the information for perception is. It's not critical you have H, because there's another type of information available in the real world as you're walking towards the edge, of this brink. And you can do this yourself at home if you want. You can take your two hands, and here you're kind of making up a mini brink here, and now my eyes are, my head is in the position of this guy up here, and here I am coming towards it. And if you look at the texture on the lower surface and the texture on the upper surface, you'll see that the closer I get to the edge, the more I see of the lower surfaces. Are you seeing this okay? Shoot, it's hard for me to. The more I see. So if I come to the edge of my pinky here, I'm getting to the edge of the brink, I see more and more of the texture of my lower hand. Okay, you can do this if you want. But here's the thing. How quickly I see the texture on my lower hand as I move forward will be dependent on how tall the brink is, what the height of that H surface is. So if I got a lot of, if I got a very high brink, H is very large, and I move forward, I see the texture revealed faster on the lower hand than if it's a very shallow brink. I don't see nearly as much texture as quickly. So the rate at which the texture of my lower hand is being revealed is specific to the height of the brink. It's actually a tiny bit more complicated than that, but I don't want to confuse you too much. So the rate that the lower surface is revealed, okay, is going to be specific to this surface. It's actually, if you're keeping score at home and you think very hard about these things, it's a tiny bit more complicated because it's going to be dependent on how quickly you're moving too. So it's the rate of which the lower surface is revealed relative to the rate at which the upper surface becomes hidden, if you're interested in that sort of thing. But I'm not going to test you on that. I just want you to understand this. I want it to be intuitive for you. So the rate, assuming you're moving at the same speed, the rate at which the lower surface becomes visible to you will be dependent on the height. Now I see it move I see a lot of texture very quickly as I'm moving at this rate. And now I see less texture as I'm moving at that same rate because it's a shallow brink. You should do this for yourself if you need an intuition. So we have this idea of another type of kind of specificational information. And it's a specificational information for a surface, for a dimension of a surface, which has no light reflecting off of it coming to the eye. Okay, it's a very different type of information, isn't it? It's not really, there's no simulation in the light to the eye of this surface, right? Nothing there, right? So, but there is information. It's reliable information, right? Especially if we do consider the kind of the disappearance of texture on the upper hand as we move. It is a very reliable. I mean, we could program a computer to look at this sort of thing, to program a robot to look at this sort of thing, and the robot would know absolutely that there is a surface of a certain height here without having a simulation in the light to the eye of that surface. So what this shows is that there can be information, reliable perceptual information for things in the world without there being a simulation of those things in the light to the eye, right? So this is a kind of more abstract type of reliable specification type of information without there being a simulation. In simulation, meaning that you can't do a cross section of the light here and see a little version of this surface H. Light reflects off of it, but it ain't reflecting into this eye. It's just not the way the optics work. The information is there, but it's in a ratio of flow across the eye, right? So this perspective, the Gibsonian ecological perspective, completely rejects the notion of the simulative assumption that the perception is based on a simulation of objects in the light. It's not a simulation. There is specificational information, but it's like in ratios of flows. Don't worry about that term or anything like that, but do understand in your gut that it is much more abstract than what we're talking about. Objects And surfaces of objects structure light. That's very, very true. But there doesn't need to be a simulation of those objects in the structured light. No simulation. It's just, again, this more abstract, this more kind of flow, kind of time-based kind of ratios of different flows that is providing reliable information to the brain, right? We're completely rethinking what the stimulus, the important stimulus to start off the perceptual process is. It's not like a simulation in the light. It's not like a photograph on the back of the eye. It's more like flows across our skin. In this case, it's flows across the eye. And once you start talking about that, boy, there seems to be really kind of sophisticated, rich, trustworthy, reliable information available to the brain. Okay. I'm going to put these terms up here. I'm not too worried that you know these, but the idea that we start the perceptual process by extracting out little sensations is also something that's going to be rejected, because there's examples where you can have, this is an example right here of sensationless perception. And all this means is, it doesn't mean that we're not getting any light to the eye. Certainly we're getting light to the eye, but we're getting no light to the eye from the surface, meaning we're getting no sense information or sense, I guess, light that can be sensed here of the surface. We perceive it, but we don't have a sensation from the surface, right? So that's what's meant here, right? That it's just that, we're not, it's just another way of saying that there's no light coming off of this surface here, getting to the eye. We're not having sense data directly from the surface. What we are getting is this rich information in the relative flows, right? And there's other examples where we can have perception without, we can have sensation, but no perception, right? So there's a few and far between, luckily, but when we're, driving in a fog, and I don't know if you've ever driven in fog that's been thick enough that it's been, really dangerous, but, there we're having sensation because, our eyes are detecting light from the fog, but there's no meaningful perception there because there's no kind of, structured texture flowing across our eyes. It's all basically structureless. It's just a fog. There's really very little structure, usable structure in the fog at all. But fortunately, we don't have to deal with that very much. Most of the time, 99.9% of the time, we are getting perceptual information from the world that is taking this form that is, again, more abstract, more flows across our skin, except across our eyes. And in that kind of intricate flow of texture across our eyes, we're getting this really important, reliable information. So it's kind of another way of saying, from this perspective, so fog is the example, sorry. From this perspective, perception is really not based on sensation. That doesn't mean that light doesn't get to the eye, but we don't need sensory, I guess, pieces from everything that we can perceive. And this is a great example. There's no sensation from that surface. Not only is there no simulation in the light, but there's no sensation from that surface, but it can be, at least the height of it can be reliably perceived because of this rich perceptual information that occurs in the relative flows. Okay, cool. Now, let's start on our last topic having to do with the ecological approach. Because hopefully I'm kind of, building an argument that maybe there are instances where we should not consider the information that comes to the eye impoverished. Maybe we really should spend time thinking about the possibility that there is this rich information that needs to be kind of rethought, right? That the brain can rely on, whether it's this global flow, whether it's information for the height of a brink, something like that. But what happens when we have to deal with how we perceive meaning? Okay, the meaning in things, right? Because, how do we know that, a chair has the meaning for us to sit on it, or our significant other has the meaning for us to hug it, that sort of thing. Because even if we can talk about how things can be, perceived as objects, as things that are happening in the world, what about the meaning? What about the meaning? We'll keep the meaning question kind of very fundamental now, but we are going to talk about it, how a Gibsonian approach discusses this. Because for the Gibsonians, for Gibson, that's what we perceive. And this is something that should sound a little familiar. This is nice because we're going to go back to the very beginning of the course, right? When we had our kids asking us, hey, well, what's perception? I mean, what do we perceive in the world? Well, we perceive colors and we perceive sounds. And why do we do that? Oh, so we, can, know that there's a banana there and know there's keys jingling or something like that. Well, why do we need to perceive those things? Well, because bananas allow us to eat, right? Jingling keys allow us to open doors, right? Sirens allow us to, move out of the way while we're driving. And so that's really what Gibson is after. He wants the deep things behind perception. He wants to understand how we perceive meaning. Okay, and according to him, that's the most important thing. That's really the most important thing. And to make assumptions that we kind of categorize things first without their meaning is the wrong way to go. You'll see what I mean by this as we go through it. And as I said, we're going to talk about this on a very fundamental level. We can talk about love and hugging and stuff like that too eventually, but he's just going to talk about meaning from the perspective of things like chairs and apples, right? So there we go, chairs and apples. According to Gibson, when we perceive an object, we spontaneously perceive its meaning. There's not a, we talked about this as being a direct perception sort of approach in the sense that we don't need to build things up by going through some sort of enhancement process of the stimulus by going from first features on up, right? Instead, he's saying, we're going to perceive directly what this object allows us to do. An apple allows us to grab it, right? That's something that it provides. A chair allows us to sit down on it, right? That's something it provides. Those are, in that sense, the meaning of the chair and the apple. And so, according to Gibson, what we're perceiving are the things in the world and what they allow us to do or what they afford. And maybe that's a new term. Well, it's probably not a new term, but we're using it in a different way. So, to say something affords something, the chair affords sitting, it allows, it provides the what's needed for us to sit. And that's how to think about affordance here. So it's not like I can afford to buy a Tesla. I can't, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what behaviors objects provide us. Apples provide us the ability to grab it because it's smaller than our hands usually, or at least we can hold it in our hands. Of course, we can eat apples and get nourishment for it. A chair affords sitting on. It also does afford, using in a bar fight if you're a cowboy. But what we're going to say is that these are properties of the objects, the affordances of the objects, and that is the goal of perception, is to perceive the affordances, what objects provide, what behaviors objects provide. Again, going way back to the beginning of the course, that's what, that's how we're answering that beautifully stupid question that my kid is asking about what's the purpose of perception for Gibson. The only purpose is to perceive the meaning, to perceive what things allow us to do. So in a lot of ways, categorizing this as belonging to the category of chair is really secondary. What that thing is, in terms of what the perceptual brain is interested in, is something that we can sit on. And in that way, even though it might be a little counterintuitive, chairs are much more similar to, say, I don't know, a cut off, what's it called, trunk or something like that, right? Where you go out into a forest, nature preserve, and somebody's cut down a tree. You can sit on that stump, right, of the trunk. Chairs are much more similar to that than A real size chair is to a dollhouse chair. Because, yeah, as humans, we can learn to categorize things that kind of have similar shapes together, but that's not what's fundamental to perception. What's fundamental to perception is our what objects allow, what behaviors are allowed by objects, what affordances objects provide. That's what's fundamental. In that sense, a chair is much more similar to a tree stump than it is a dollhouse chair. A real chair is much more similar to a tree stump. Okay, so very, very briefly, it's the behaviors that are allowed by objects. That's all we're saying here. And they are defined not just by the objects, but by the animal too, by me, right? So what affords sitting for me is not what affords sitting for an elephant. Or maybe, by the way, this is what, as I said, this is what is perceived. This is the purpose of perception. This is the thing that perception is after. It's not to classify it as a chair. It's to perceive it as something that allows a behavior. That is what the perceptual object is right there. That's all what's meant by this. But we're defining it not just by the object itself, but by the animal. So as I said, a chair for me is not a chair for an elephant. Okay, or maybe more appropriately, a sit-onable place for me is not a sit-onable place for an elephant, nor is it necessarily a sit-onable place for our friend the Chihuahua with a sweater, right? Yeah, you might be able to jump up there or something like that, but not in all cases where I could certainly have sit-onable things where the Chihuahua wouldn't. And that would also be true of the elephant, right? An elephant can't use a chair like this. It has to use something much bigger if it decides it wants to sit, right? But that's an important component of what we're talking about here. Okay, so the question is, are we sensitive to what objects provide us specifically in terms of behavior? What do objects provide us in terms of behavior? And there's been hundreds and hundreds of studies on this sort of thing, but I'm going to talk about one of the earliest just so you have an intuition for it. Okay, and we've been talking about stairs already today when we discussed the brink, stair climbing. So here's an experiment where people were asked if they could climb a set of stairs. Now, I don't know if you have these in your gym. It was the last time you were to the gym, right? All of us. But I had them in the gym I used to go to. What they are is a set of Stairmaster stairs, except they're actually designed for rehabilitation, so they're really fancy. And what you can, so they're actually, it's a stair treadmill. Maybe you've seen that. And what you can do with a lot of these stair treadmills is you can increase how high the riser is, basically how high the brink is. For people that are trying to regain their ability to walk upstairs, you can adjust these so they're at an optimum height and all that sort of thing. But what this study did, this first study I'm going to be talking about, what it did is it looked to see if people can look at a set of stairs and judge whether they are climbable. So, probably most of us can climb a stair that, so here's a stair, right? Most of us can climb a stair that has this height. That's probably too small. Most of us can probably climb a stair that has this height. But when the stair gets really big, right, like we talked about the brinks around campus, we can't do it anymore. And this, we're going to hit a point where we say, nah, I can't do that anymore. Are people good, in other words, at perceiving the affordance of stairs for climbing? That's another way of asking this now with our new terminology. Are we good at this type of thing? And you bring in tall people like Shaquille O'Neal, you bring in short people like Rosenblum, and you ask them if they can climb a set of stairs that has a riser height of different dimensions. Maybe it changes in increments of 2 inches or something like that. And what you find is people are outstanding at this, okay? They are absolutely perfect, because what you do after you ask them to make these judgments is you actually ask them to climb sets of stairs to see, what works and what doesn't work for them. And people are right on target, okay? In fact, they're much better at this than saying something like, how high is this stair? Is it 5 inches? Is it 8 inches? Is it 10 inches? That sort of thing. People are really bad at judging how tall a stair is in terms of inches, but boy, are they good at determining the types of stairs that they can climb. They're just perfect at that type of thing. As it turns out, if you're interested, regardless of whether you're Shaquille O'Neal, or a little Rosenblum, the highest stair that you're going to be able to climb is about 88% of the length of your leg, measured from the floor to where your hip bone is. Okay, if you want to touch your hip bone, okay, that's the kind of tall height down to the ground. And so the tallest stair you can climb is about 88% of that length. So what is that? About maybe 2/3 up your thigh or something like that. That's the tallest you can climb. And Shaquille O'Neal is able to perceive that, and little Rosenblum is able to perceive that as well, right? It scales to leg length. People are outstanding at this. They can perceive it right away. They are much better at perceiving this affordance property of stairs than they are judging the height of the stair in inches or centimeters or feet or whatever. Okay, they're really good. And this is true of all this affordance literature suggests the same thing. They are really, really good at perceiving properties of objects that have a behavioral relevance, of perceiving affordance properties of objects. They're nearly perfect. A follow-up study involved this. Which of two sets of stairs, so they brought another set of stairs in, and say which would be easier for you to climb. And now all of the heights are going to be within a range that you can climb, but which is going to be easier for you to climb. Okay, so it's not just, is it possible for you to climb this, or is it too high? But yes, you're going to be able to climb this, but is this easy? And maybe you've encountered this, that sometimes stairs have a very kind of low height, maybe for architectural reasons. I think this is true in some of the old temples in ancient Greece. The stairs going up are pretty low. So yeah, you can certainly climb them. It's no problem, but you get kind of tired because there's so many of them, kind of walking up like a penguin or something like that, because the riser is so small, right? It's not going to be the most efficient stair. It's not going to be the one that's easy to climb, right? And so you ask instead, which is your favorite stair? Which is the one that if you were asked to walk on a treadmill for a long period of time, you'd say, I could do that, right? And again, people are outstanding at this because they did, in fact, test them after they made their judgments. They tested them with various stairs with different riser heights, including the ones that they said they thought were best, but all the ones around it. And they are able to judge the easiest one as measured by their own metabolic efficiency. And of course, it's going to depend on how long your leg is, right? Shaq's going to have a more metabolic, probably a higher metabolic efficiency with a higher step than I am, right? And if you're interested, if you decide you want to do architecture someday and want to design stairs, the most metabolically efficient stair for anyone to climb is 1/4 of their leg length. So it's, maybe halfway up their, I don't know, their calf or something like that. Okay, it's going to be, of course, the absolute value is going to be different for different people. Just said, okay, the transcript's working again, sorry. It's going to be different for different people, but it's all the same ratio for everybody when it comes to the relative height relative to their leg. It's all the same, okay? So people, yes, are good at perceiving the affordance property of stairs that are at all climbable. They know what's going to be too hard to climb, too high. And maybe more impressive, they are really good, as you can see here. This is their judgments superimposed right on what they can actually do. They are astoundingly good at judging the type of stair that is the one most metabolically or energetically efficient for them. They can perceive the affordance property of most climbable, and they can do it immediately. It's no problem, right? And they can do it so much better than judging inches and meters and stuff like that. So what this suggests is that maybe, yeah, when you ask people to judge affordance properties, they are really, really good. Making the task much more behaviorally relevant is really a nice way of bringing out the best behavior in your subjects, the best judgments in your subjects. And it could be because that's what the brain is designed to do, to perceive properties of objects that allow behaviors. Okay. All right, let's take a little break here and do our next question. There's a question in chat. You can see that's true. Hallie does say you can skip steps, yeah, on the smaller steps. I often do that. When I encounter an architectural maybe an old temple or something like that when I'm traveling and the steps are really small, I'll certainly do that. But in that experiment, they weren't allowed. They said you have to climb the steps as if you're climbing every step, and people were really good at knowing that that was not going to be metabolically efficient. Oh, metabolically efficient just means that that's the one that takes the least amount of energy that you're climbing. That's all that means, right? So you're climbing steps, and you know that some steps take a lot of energy to climb, some take less energy to climb. People are very good at perceiving that, and that can be kind of confirmed by testing their metabolic efficiency as they're climbing different sets of stairs. Measuring heart rate, measuring breathing rate, all that sort of stuff. I'm not really concerned about that. It's just people are good at knowing which type of stairs are going to be best for them in terms of stamina. Okay. All right, let's do a quick poll question, and then I'm going to have to speed up a tiny bit here. Okay, it's our friend the brink. The brink example is important for demonstrating that A, organizational principles are necessary for perception. B, the simulative assumption is necessary for perception. C, there can be information for a surface without its simulation in the light. Or D, connection strengths can change with experience. So some of these foils now are not about the ecological or brink approach at all. So you should keep that in mind as you do this question. Cool, I'll give you about another 10 seconds and then we'll go through the answer. Most of you are getting this right. Okay, terrific. Most of you got it right. The correct answer is C. Let's go through each of the answers to make sure we understand why. Okay, so organizational principles are necessary for perception. The brink has nothing to do with organizational principles, as we discussed it at least. That's from the Gestalt approach, the organizational principles. So that's not something relevant to what the brink is about or the ecological approach. The simulative assumption is necessary for perception. Actually, it is actually the opposite of that. The simulative assumption suggests that there is a simulation of what is being perceived in the light. But here's an example, the brink example, where we're able to perceive something about a surface that is not being reflected into the eye, right? Because the light is reflecting off, but it's not getting to the eye as you approach it. So there is no simulation of this surface or its height to the eye, but we're still able to perceive it. So B is wrong as well. There can be information for a surface without its simulation in the light. This is exactly it. The information here is the how quickly the texture of the lower surface is being revealed as you walk towards it, right? This is a shallow surface. You're seeing the texture less quickly as you move forward than if it's a high surface. You're seeing a lot of texture really quickly as you move forward with the same rate. Okay, so the correct answer is C. And connection strengths, of course, are really just relevant to the connectionist approach, not this ecological approach or its brink example. It's just a foil answer. Okay, cool. Any quick questions on that? All right, then let's just wind down our last 10 minutes, and I'll give you one last question at the very end too. So you can have an extra question in for your exam. So I'll go a tiny bit faster here. It's one thing to say that we can perceive affordances, but as we've been saying with this Gibsonian approach, we've got to be able to show that there's information available to the eye, for example, for affordances. We don't want meaning to have to be something that's kind of added to the input by the brain later on. There has to be something that's available in the light. And that's kind of a pretty radical idea. I think people kind of understand this affordance idea that, yeah, maybe this is a neat way of kind of rethinking the methods we would use in perceptual psychology or something like that, the affordance approach. But And that it makes sense if animals in fact evolve to perceive the meaning in things, right? That's the most important aspect of it, how we can behave in the world successfully, all that sort of stuff. But how is there information in the light without there needing to be the brain to kind of add the meaning to things? This is tricky. But this, oh, by the way, this is, let's forget this intersection of biology and physics. For those of you that are interested, you can think about why that would be here, but I'm not going to spend time doing that since I have to go rather fast here. So the question is, what is the information for affordances? How can we talk about there being information for the, I guess, behavioral possibilities of something like a set of stairs, something like a chair, especially for specific animals? As we said, the affordance of a chair is different for me than it would be for an elephant, as it would be for a chihuahua with a sweater, right? How is there information available to the eye that tells us this? It's tricky, because what Gibson is saying essentially is that meaning is in the light. That sounds kind of groovy, kind of 1960s California. Meaning's in the light, dude. What does that mean? Well, what he's saying is that if we are assuming that there's this kind of reliable specificational information that is available to the eye, through flows and things like that, it's got to be more than just information for things like global flow. It has to be information for the meaning of things such as chairs and stairs, and that's a hard thing to try to do. But let me show you a possible way to do it and how he kind of started to think about this. Okay, let's remember that the information for things is dependent not just on the light reflecting off of objects, but also where the light reflects to. Okay, so it's going to be determined by the environment and the animal. Okay. And that's also true of affordances, right? As I said, again, just a chair, that I'm sitting on right now is not a good chair for an elephant, right? So affordances are also defined not just by, the environmental property, but by the animal's properties as well. As I said, a dollhouse chair is not really a chair. I mean, it's not really I guess you could call it a chair, but it's not a sit-onable thing, which is much more important as far as my brain's concerned. The behavioral potential is the most important thing there, right? So here's the issue. Both the affordance is defined by the animal and the environment, and the light is defined by the animal and the environment. All this is saying is that when light reflects off of something like a chair, like a stair, it reflects to a point where an animal's eye is, where a perceiver's eye is. And for that reason, the light I'm getting is different from the light an elephant's getting, the light a chihuahua with a sweater is getting, and the light that Shaquille O'Neal is getting. We're all getting different structures of light because, it still might be reflecting off of a chair, or, the chairs here in my Death Star as they're coming towards my eye, but my eye is in a different position from an elephant's and a chihuahua's and Shaquille O'Neal's, right? And for that reason, the light is different. And for humans, at least, for me and Shaquille O'Neal, where my eye is, is going to, so there's me and there's Shaquille. We're both looking at the same scene now, but seeing it somewhat differently because of the position of our eyes. Here's the scene. We're both looking at a dad and his son holding hands next to a Christmas tree. Okay. We're both looking, we're standing, except, we're standing now next to each other, me and Shaquille, right? We like to go Christmas tree shopping together, me and Shaquille. Okay, so we're looking out and we see a dad and a son holding hands, and there's a Christmas tree next to it. Shaquille is going to see the horizon, or, whatever's, far off in the distance, kind of bisecting this scene, at a higher point than me, showing that the information that we're getting is in fact different, right? And it is proportionate to our height. And our eye height is also proportional to our leg length. So when we get information for the world, this is always true. When we get information for the world, we're not just getting it for the environment, we're also getting information about ourselves relative to the environment. Shaq is getting information that he is taller than me relative to the environment. And more importantly, he's getting information about what things are in the world relative to his dimensions. I'm getting information that's different. I'm getting information about what's in the world relative to my dimensions. Okay. And for that reason, okay, we are able to perceive affordances relative to ourselves, right? The information for eye height is giving me information for leg length, which is then going to allow me to perceive things relative to my own dimensions. So it's because the structure of the light for Shaq versus for Rosenblum is different, essentially, that we can each perceive affordances relative to ourselves. Okay, I don't want to get into too much. In fact, we know this from experiments because you can, of course, modify eye height. So say I've always wanted to see what the world looked like from Shaq's height, so I start wearing stilts or something like that. And then I'm asked about affordances, and they are very systematically affected. So varying the eye height of a perceiver affects perception of, maybe not surprisingly, what I can sit on, what I can climb on, but other things too, like whether a doorway is wide enough for me to pass, whether an object is reachable, whether a chair sittable, as we said, an object is reachable. So it would seem that in some ways, the brain is using the visual information that's coming in to determine something about the world and something about itself, the body it's in, relative to the world. I apologize, I had to go through that kind of quickly, but I want to make sure we go through this last slide. It's actually 2 slides, but one's just a review, and then I'll give you a quick question. So, premises of the ecological approach. We talk about animals in their natural environments, including with texture on all the surfaces that we encounter and with motion. We talk about the information being something that's more abstract than just something that's in a simulation. And we talk about that information as being specificational, as something that the brain can rely upon, okay? Information from this perspective is not ambiguous. And therefore, perception can be based on the proximal stimulation alone without there being the need for inferences or a construction or organizational principles or representations. This is a theory of psychology that tries to understand behavior, perception, everything without mental representation, making it a very, very radical approach. And just to remember what this is like, the goal of the ecological psychologist is to understand what this information is like, Okay, there's a slide I'm going to provide you that has all the theories just boxed out like that. That's yours, but let me give you very quickly one last question just for fun. Sorry. Okay, here we go. Here's the last question. Sorry about this, everybody. Okay. The last question has to do with, oh, wait, is this it? Yes, ecological meaning. The ecological approach addresses the perceptual meaning problem, you just learned this, by proposing A, computations are made on representations, is that what it says? Affordances are constructed in the mind, is that what it says? Affordances are specified in the light, is that what it says? Or graceful degradation. Okay, I'm going to have to end a little early here, but most of you are getting this. You're doing really well. I won't have time to explain the answer, but the correct answer is, in fact, C. That's how you should answer it. It is that affordances are not constructed in the mind, according to Gibson. The affordances are because of eye height being something that defines the light, is going to be specified in the light. So the correct answer to this question, when you see it on the exam, is C. Good luck on your exam, everybody. It will be posted midnight tonight. See you Tuesday.